And welcome back to Face the Nation. Joining us now on page 2, Gerald Seib, the Washington bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal. Blaine Harden, whose latest book, Escape from Camp 14, is about a North Korean man who escaped one of the highest security prisons in that country. It's just out in paperback. Plus, we're joined by our congressional correspondent, Nancy Cordes, and our White House correspondent, Major Garrett. Blaine, I want to start with you because I want to get back to this North Korean thing. You've done extensive research on North Korea for the book that you wrote. You're an old Washington Post hand. And I think you're working on another book now about North Korea. What do you make of this latest situation? What should we read in? What does this young guy want?
It's hard to know what he wants, but I think that one thing that Americans should know is that North Koreans are afraid of the United States. They're afraid of the United States because of the legacy of the Korean War. Between 1950 and 1953, American bombers laid waste to most of the country. About 85% of the structures were flattened by U.S. bombs. In North Korea, the curtain was pulled around the country after the war, and it's as though, for many North Koreans, that bombing happened last Thursday. So what that means, if the U.S. government is known to be flying B-2 bombers over the Korean peninsula, it scares North Koreans. And it gives Kim Jong-un exactly what he wants, which is fear, which increases his legitimacy.
You know, and I'd like to ask, maybe if any of you have any information, which the thing I wondered about, you know, that B-2, the U.S. government made sure everybody saw a picture of the B-2 there. That is the stealth bomber. I wonder, do either of you know whether the North Koreans knew that bomber had flown into that area before it did, or did they just wake up and see that picture?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that that's been used before, and I'm not sure that the North Koreans knew, but the Pentagon and the White House made sure they knew this time. That's, I think, was the important thing. And, that the exercises were going to happen with the South Koreans. They were going to be big, they were going to be noisy, and they were going to include B-2s and F-22s. And so that was as interesting as what the North Koreans did in the last couple of weeks. It was steps out of the old North Korean playbook, with a very vigorous American response. And so it was the combination of the two that was really set.
But the idea that bomber was over there close enough to fly over North Korea, and the first that the North Koreans knew of it was a photograph released by the U.S. government, that would sort of add to maybe however
I think it was
they
a
felt
propaganda
about it.
gift that the North Korean government was really happy to have.
Really?
That, along with other announcements in the past few days by the Obama administration. In fact, there were reports that midway through last week, the Obama administration decided to roll back these kinds of visible symbols of confrontation, thinking that perhaps they'd wrong-footed themselves.
Well, the administration's perspective is that it will be less noisy and less visible going forward for a couple of reasons. It was noisy and visible earlier on to reassure the South Koreans and the Japanese that we were serious about this pact that we just signed, that if South Korea is attacked by North Korea, we will defend it. And those visible signs, F-22, B-2 stealth, was meant to say, yes, we really mean what we've just said on paper. Now they believe they've made the point, and they don't want to do anything else that could either be misinterpreted or provide a propaganda tool for Kim Jong-un. That's why this Minuteman launch, which is unconnected to these military exercises, will be postponed, so it's not to be viewed as provocation. But the administration does believe it's reassured the allies in the region, sent a proper signal, and picking up on what was said earlier, Bob, about China, just this morning, Xi Jinping, the new leader of China, said, we will not allow provocative actions in the region. We don't want anyone in the region to set things in motion that can't be stopped for selfish gain. That can only be viewed as a Chinese, if not rebuke, at least more than subtle criticism to North Korea about the game it's playing and the potential consequences.
Well, I mean, when you got Fidel Castro saying this is the most
but
serious
trust me, within the region,
Cuban
Xi Jinping is a much larger voice and much more prominent and much more authoritative on this question than Fidel Castro.
Well, let's hope that this is all just bluster. But as we heard this morning, every indication is they will go ahead with this missile test on Wednesday.
So we're guaranteed another week or so of this, at least, I think. And I think one of the things to remember when it comes to the North Korean motivation here is there are new governments all around. There's obviously a new leader in North Korea. There's a new government in China. There's a new government in South Korea. There's a new government in place in Japan. And so I have to believe that Kim is in the business of sending some signals to all of those people. And the second term of the Obama administration may be different from the first as well. But that's also where miscalculations happen, and I think that's what Senator McCain was talking about earlier, that maybe nobody intends to have a war here, but you stumble into a war when you get into a situation where you have those kinds of conditions on the table.
World War II happened for more obscure reasons, World War I, I should say, than what we're seeing here. I mean, it is easy to stumble into.
And on Friday, the White House went out of its way to say, if there is this missile launch, we will not be surprised by it. We are anticipating in sort of a way to suggest this is not going to provoke us, this is not going to provoke the South Koreans. If this happens, we'll deal with it. But by preemptively describing it as something that will not surprise us, that's trying to lower the temperature.
You know, Nancy, I haven't brought you in because Congress, as is its wont, has been on another extended vacation.
2 full weeks.
So there hasn't been too much going on Capitol Hill on this story. But it occurs to me that this probably could not have happened at a worse time for the president's legislative agenda up on the Hill, because here you got all these issues, the rubber's finally going to hit the road, and suddenly we have this situation in North Korea that there's so much attention on.
That's true, though I think there is so much momentum behind immigration reform, as you picked up on in your conversation with Senator Schumer and McCain this morning, that there may not be a way to stop it at this point. They're probably going to get a final deal, maybe midweek, maybe the end of the week, but they've got almost all of the pieces in place at this point. The one outstanding part of this deal has to do with migrant farm workers, how much you pay them, how many of them you let into the country every year under a new visa program. Once they've got that figured out, it's just a little bit of housekeeping, and then this is really a marked achievement for Congress, which has struggled so mightily with this issue for so many years.
I thought one of the most important things Senator McCain said this morning was he does not want a filibuster on this. He wants this to go to the floor, and he wants people to vote on it. And you've already got people like some of the new folk in town, Ted Cruz, among others, saying, well, they're going to filibuster it. McCain said no.
Right, and they're really trying to dot all their I's and cross their T's here. You know, they're making sure that they've got labor on board. They're making sure they've got the Chamber of Commerce on board, the agriculture industry on board, so that no Republican or Democrat rank and file member who wants to walk away from this can do it easily by saying, well, the chamber's not on board, so I'm not going to be on
Well,
board.
what about Marco Rubio? So far, he's part of this group of 8 trying to cobble together this, but says he's not there yet.
Well, he's got a delicate dance here because he knows that he really is the conduit between this group and Republicans, trying to convince skeptical Republicans to get on board. So he needs to act as if, you know, he's not just going to capitulate, he's really holding out until the last minute to get the best deal for Republicans. But he's been integrally involved in every step of this process. He will be on board at the end, but he needs to be the one saying, we're not going to rush this. We are going to hold hearings. This is going to be done out in the light of day, so that you have Republicans who have opposed immigration reform in the past but feel that it's in their interest to support it now to be able to do that more easily.
Do you have a sense, Major, that they can actually pass a bill this year?
Well, the White House believes that it can, and on Friday it became very much aware of this Dear Colleague letter that Senator Marco Rubio was circulating, asking for a slow process in the Judiciary Committee, as well as a full amendment process on the Senate floor. Now, some in the White House looked at that as he's trying to torpedo this. The general consensus was that if you're arguing at this stage about a deliberate process, you're essentially conceding that this is probably going to make it through the Senate Judiciary Committee and probably succeed on the Senate floor, and you're just trying to reassure your colleagues that nothing is going to be jammed down their throats. So the White House still net looks at Marco Rubio and says he is a positive influence, and this is not an attempt with a Dear Colleague letter circulated among his colleagues to torpedo the process, but to slightly advance it.
And when I talk to people who are involved in these negotiations, no one thinks that he's not going to be a part of this at the end of the day.
Let's talk about some of the other problems that Washington is facing. Jerry, do you see any chance that they'll come to an agreement on some sort of a deficit reduction
You know, there's a
package?
chance. It's probably less than 50%. But what's going to be interesting this week is President Obama is finally going to put out his budget, and we kind of know what's in it already. It's a budget designed to keep the idea, the dream of a big deficit deal alive, because he's making everybody a little bit mad. If that's the sign of progress in Washington, that you've made everybody a little angry, there will be progress this week, because the president is going to propose taking a little bite out of Social Security benefit increases down the road by changing the inflation measure, and he's going to propose that the Republicans sign on to some more revenues. That makes the left angry, it makes the right angry, but the idea is to say, look, I'll give a little bit on entitlements if you give a little bit on revenues. That's the basic formula for a big deficit deal. Can it be done between now and, say, September when the debt ceiling is going to be hit again? You know, it's a chance, but not a great chance, I would say.
Will Republicans go along with some sort of increase in revenues?
You know, right now, the initial reactions were no, but the White House argument is twofold here. They're going to say, essentially, look, to the Republicans, you've already done the hard part. You agreed to raise tax rates at the end of last year, so this is the easy stuff. We're proposing closing some loopholes. That's not so hard. And secondly, these are things that Republicans themselves have at various times in the recent past proposed, these kinds of loophole closings. So you've done the hard stuff, and this is stuff you guys have indicated in the past you could live with, so why not? Well, why not is politics. It's really tough to be a Republican that jumps on board more revenues right now. But that's the play, and that's what the White House is going to try to set up.
And can the president actually convince the people in his party to go along with significant reform of the entitlement program?
Well, there's no evidence of it yet. The Senate Democratic budget, which passed before the president's budget will arrive, said nothing about changing the inflation adjustment on consumer price index, and probably never will. There is a political aspect to this, Bob. The White House believes that it is staking out a position of unvarnished reasonableness, and that if Republicans don't do this, then in the midterm elections in 2014, along with gun control, if that doesn't work, and possibly immigration, if that doesn't work, the White House can say, look, we are the party of compromise and movement. The Republicans are the party of intransigence and opposition, and with Organizing for America and all these other various offshoots that the Democrats are focusing on to win back the seats, they need to get a House majority. That will be part of the political argument. And I would say race one to keep an eye on is South Carolina 1, because that special election will be a very early indicator of Democrats having a chance to get back the House in the next term.
And this, of course, is the one that will feature on the Republican side the former governor, Mark Sanford, and on the Democratic side, Stephen Colbert's
Elizabeth
sister,
Colbert Bush, yes.
who pronounces it Colbert.
Yes.
So we'll see how that comes out. It looks to me like that any kind of meaningful legislation on gun control may not happen here. Nancy?
Well, we've got a few pieces of bipartisan agreement on gun trafficking, on cutting back on straw purchases, things like that. But there are a lot of people who wanted it to be much bigger, notably Democrats. And they haven't thrown in the towel yet. Senator Schumer, who was here this morning, is now in delicate talks, Senator Manchin of West Virginia as well, with Senator Toomey of Pennsylvania. He's kind of a new entrant into these discussions over, is there a way that we can create some kind of bipartisan agreement on background checks that will enable Toomey to get on board? That would be significant. He's got a very good rating with the NRA. If he was able to get behind something, they could then sell that to the wider Senate. And there are a number of senators, Republicans, who have said privately to Democrats, we could get behind this, but only if you get a big-time Republican on board first.
Jerry, do you think there's any chance for anything meaningful, like a real good background check, if nothing
I think that's going to depend entirely on how you define meaningful, but I think it's clear that what people thought, people who were advocates of gun control thought 2 months ago after Connecticut, we're so far back from that now. I mean, we're talking about maybe background checks. We're not talking about magazine increase or decreases in the size of magazines, and assault weapons seem to have gone off the table entirely. So compared to what people were talking about just a couple of months ago, the ambitions for the gun control folks have scaled way back already, and that's where we're talking now, and it could get worse for them as it goes forward.
Blaine, you used to be involved in what was going on around Washington. Now you're out writing books.
Well, I'm
How
surprised
does it all look to you right now?
I'm surprised that public revulsion over the shooting seems to have declined over a relatively short period of time. That is just kind of shocking to me.
Do you think that that means that, I mean, what is all of this, what we're seeing now, what does it say about Washington right now? Has it changed? You've been here a long time like I have.
Well, people don't get together and talk when they disagree. They tend to live in separate separate worlds.
I will say that gun control advocates feel, many of them, like, we don't have to get everything all at once. Even if we can make some of these steps, it's further than we've gotten in decades. We'll take it, and then we'll fight another day. These things often don't happen all at once. It's going to be step by step.
And look, something is better than nothing. And for many, many years, this debate did not exist in Washington at all. It just was completely nullified by political paralysis and fear. And the president believes some of that was his responsibility, and he feels badly for it. And you could see right after Newtown, he felt that he had to sum it up something within him deeper and more profound on this issue. He's going to be in Connecticut tomorrow. The First Lady has another very big event this week. The Vice President will have too. There will be a concerted, visible, rhetorical push from the White House on this issue. And they are content, as the President said, and he really tipped this off in the State of the Union address, vote. Not pass, vote. They believe this is a long-term process. And the votes will be clarifying on this issue the first time around, and what may lead to something more successful the second or third time around. The White House does believe this is a long-term process.
You know, what I found remarkable today was that, Major and I were talking about this before, is that on the immigration bill, people find it remarkable that it's going to go through a regular process. Oh, there are going to be hearings, there's going to be a vote, there's going to be a vote on the floor, then it'll go to conference. Well, that's the way it's supposed to work around here. It's so unusual now that people find it exceptional enough to say, wow, that's what's going to happen to the immigration bill. That's a real commentary on how Washington doesn't work, to me at least, at this point.
All right. Well, I think you're absolutely right. Thank you all very much. And we'll be back in a minute to talk about this new book on drones and the CIA.